Hey guys, it's Larry with the Financial Lift, and today we're going to be talking about Joe Biden's $15,000 tax credit proposal for first-time homebuyers. And you're understanding that right. There's two key phrases to understand there. $15,000, which is a good thing. Second phrase there is proposal. We're just talking about a proposal. Nothing is actually being signed yet, or nothing's actually even been formally written up yet. All we have so far is Joe Biden's campaign website to actually read about and kind of theorize what this $15,000 advanceable tax credit would be like, and how that could potentially impact the future real estate market. And we're going to be talking about why this tax credit may not necessarily be as great as it seems, or at least, at the very least, why there may be consequences that people may not necessarily have thought of. I think everybody gets very excited when they see $15,000, and that applies to you, right? If you're a first-time home buyer, you get very excited. You don't necessarily think about the consequences. Or on the reverse end, maybe you're not necessarily a first-time home buyer, and you think, well, this $15,000 tax credit isn't going to apply to me, so why do I care about it? But even if you aren't a first-time home buyer like myself, I already own a home, there are ways to, that I'm going to talk about, there are ways to benefit from this potential tax credit. So if you stick around, not only will you understand how I plan on benefiting from this program, but you'll also understand and be able to prepare for some of these consequences I'm going to talk about. So the first important part that we're going to need to understand is how this tax credit would be applied. And the first thing to understand is that in the proposal anyways, that's going to be an advanceable type tax credit. So in the past, in previous years, the way these home buying type programs usually work is that this tax credit usually happens after the fact. So let's say you buy a home, let's say this summer, you start looking now, and then you end up closing on this home, and during the summer, you still have to come up with the money for that down payment. Eventually, when you file, so we're in 2021 right now, when you actually file that tax return, which is going to happen in 2022, that's when you actually will get that tax credit back to you. But since in the proposal it's listed as an advanceable type tax credit, that means you wouldn't have to come up with the money yourself right now for the down payment, which is going to be a key point that I'll come back later on why I think it's going to heavily impact the real estate market in a negative way. I also think this question has to be answered on how this advanceable type tax credit would end up working. Would it be a situation that you actually do get that 15 grand right before you end up closing, or is it going to be a situation where it's basically kind of works as a rebate where you still end up having to come up with that 15 grand yourself, but you don't necessarily have to wait all the way until you do your tax returns for the following year to get that 15 grand back? It would just kind of be some rebate after you actually close on your home. So you still have to have that 15 grand, but you wouldn't necessarily have to wait as long. So the other important thing to understand is usually the way this tax credit has worked in previous years is usually it's applied as a percentage of the home value you're buying. So let's say that the tax credit is actually a maximum of $20,000, but it's only applied to the home value at 1%. So if I buy a $100,000 home, I'm only getting back $1,000. So for me to qualify for that full amount that the tax credit claims that they're going to give, in this case it's $15,000, I'd have to buy a more expensive home. And in some cases, you're kind of incentivized to buy a home that may be out of your price range. So the other important thing we can learn from looking at previous years where a first-time home buyer type credit has been offered is the probability of when this tax credit, this $15,000 Joe Biden tax credit we're talking about, may actually be implemented. In previous years, presidents have usually used this as a tool to kind of boost up the economy. So especially when the real estate market is dropping, they use it as a tool to kind of prop up the real estate market, get people out there buying homes. Another example of this is when they drop interest rates, right? Nobody's buying homes out there. So a way to basically push up the demand for real estate is by dropping the interest rate. Because if I can get a mortgage at 1% interest rate versus getting a mortgage at 10%, of course I'm going to buy not only a bigger home, but I'm going to be incentivized to buy more homes. Or people that wouldn't have bought a home, that 10% for a mortgage seems too expensive to them, at 1%, that seems reasonable enough that they may jump into the real estate market, even though previously they were just a renter. So then this question has to be answered on whether or not I think the economy right now is struggling enough to the point that I think a tax credit plan is likely to get passed. And this is going to be a little bit controversial of an answer, but the reality is there are definitely some people right now that are suffering. There are some people that are unemployed. There are some people that are basically living paycheck to paycheck, barely able or not even able to pay their rent. But there's certainly another group of people that basically nothing has changed for them, or if anything, things have gotten better. Now they're working from home, they're still employed, and now they don't necessarily have to worry about, going to the grocery store and doing anything like that. They just have groceries delivered to them. So they're living their best lives, and they're still employed, and they're still, they're not necessarily struggling. So then that kind of gets into the answer on whether or not I do think something is likely to get passed anytime soon. So basically there are two main factors that result in the likeliness that this tax credit would get passed anytime soon. One being whether or not this group that is suffering has a loud enough voice and is able to generate a loud enough voice and concern that a tax credit for first-time home buyers does get passed. And the second just has to do with the fact that there's trade-offs, right? So if we focus on first-time home buyers and kind of propping that up, then propping up student debt forgiveness may kind of fall by the wayside. Or maybe that's the prioritization that politicians want to go with. And so then first-time home buyers kind of get left by the wayside in that situation. And I think the other thing people have to think about is from a president's perspective, or even just Congress as a whole, their perspective. You don't necessarily want to use all the tools available to you right away. You want to kind of space it out. So going back to that interest rate idea, if we drop interest rates down to 0% to prop up real estate markets right now, then let's say that the real estate market crashes even further down the road. Well, now I've already dropped interest rates down to 0%. Now that's a tool that's no longer available to me. So now I have to start using things like tax credits as a good example of a way to kind of boost up the real estate market. So to kind of summarize my prediction, I think most likely Congress and the president are basically going to hold off on pushing this tax credit incentive as long as possible. The first thing that you're going to see as a signal is one, real estate market prices starting to drop. Once you start to see that drop, then you may start to see interest rates drop as a way to basically prop up the real estate market even further. Right now, if you're not familiar, real estate prices are, in some areas are at record levels. That's mostly due to the fact that the supply of homes is relatively small because people aren't moving out of their homes. They're comfortable where they are. They're working from home, so they're not putting up their house for sale, but yet there's still the same demand or even higher demand for buying. So a lot of people are buying these homes because interest rates are pretty low right now. So then they're trying to buy homes with a small supply of homes. That's going to drive up prices relatively high, which this point actually relates to why I think this first-time home buyer credit doesn't just impact buyers, and it doesn't just impact first-time buyers as well. It also impacts sellers. It impacts people that are looking to buy a second home or perhaps move to a different home, because the reality is this $15K that's going to be dropped into everybody's pocket, just an example, is going to cause real estate prices to basically skyrocket, right? So if I'm interested in buying my dream home, I find this home over here, it's perfect, it's ideal, and I offer $100,000 for it, and that's what they're asking, I think I'm going to get that. But now that I have this $15K in my pocket, perhaps I'm willing to offer $10,000 more just for the fact that I can secure that. Or if you think about me trying to outbid somebody on their offer, that person also has 15 grand extra in their pocket as well. So we're going to start to bid up and up that $15,000 extra because we both have it. So what are the negative consequences that could happen in terms of this tax credit? Well, just think about somebody who's planning on moving, right? So if this tax credit gets passed, let's say, June of this year, then in that case, if you just happen to be one of the people that was holding off on moving to a new school district, perhaps you got a new job offer in a different state, and you're planning on selling your home right around that time, that's actually a good thing in one sense, right? You're going to get a better offer for your home, but on the reverse end, all the homes that you're trying to buy as well are now more expensive because everybody else is starting to increase their asking price for the home that they're selling by $15,000. So even from the first-time home buyer's perspective, sure, I'm getting that $15,000, but on the reverse end, the homes are likely $15,000 more. And it's not just because sellers are asking for $15,000 more. That is part of it, obviously, but the other part of it is that the sellers have to go buy another home, and most likely that seller is charging $15,000 more for their home. So to make up that difference, they're going to sell their home at $15,000 more as well. The other huge word of caution is that this tax credit will incentivize people to basically buy homes out of their price range, or at least at the very least at the top of their price range. So if I can only afford a home that's $100,000 because I can't, I don't have the financial discipline to save enough money to be able to afford a bigger down payment. But now that I have this $15,000 tax credit, now maybe I go out there and buy a more expensive home. That's not necessarily how you should approach the situation. You should still try to buy the home that you thought was reasonable for your income level, your savings level. Buy that home, and that $15,000 tax credit is just kind of added bonus. So now I want to go over how I would use this tax credit to my full advantage, even though I currently have a home. And this may not necessarily apply to everybody's particular situation, but I just wanted to at least share my personal experience on how I'm going to approach this. So currently right now I'm living in a house that I purchased, so the house is only under my name. But yet, and while I'm not necessarily married, I am in this relationship. So if we wanted to, we could buy a second home, but use a second home as our new primary residence. And so my partner would be the person that they would qualify for the first time home buyer tax credit. And then I would use this home, probably turn it into a rental property, or at some other later point, sell it. So that way I'm still getting full advantage of that tax credit while not necessarily under my name, because we live together. It would still be a situation where we're qualifying for that benefit, but yet it would only apply to one person. So obviously that situation may not necessarily apply to everybody, because if you are married and you already have a home, then you wouldn't qualify in any way for that first time home buyer tax credit. Or if you're a single person and you already have a home, then once again, you don't have a partner to rely on for them to qualify for that tax credit, even though you yourself already purchased a home. But I will share an example of a way you still can benefit from this tax credit. So going back to that idea that this whole tax credit is going to boost up real estate prices because there's going to be this increased demand, yet the supply of homes is going to remain the same. So think about how that's going to time out. So in the very beginning, obviously everybody's going to qualify for that tax credit based on regional areas, but let's just say everybody qualifies for it. It's obviously going to have this huge peak, but then at some point it's going to start to level off, because eventually people are going to have used their first time home buyer tax credit. So then, at some point it's going to start to decrease that demand, which means real estate prices are going to start to drop. But what if you're that type of position where, prices are already starting to drop because people have already used their first time home buyer tax credit, but you yourself haven't. So prices start to drop because the demand is starting to drop, but yet you still qualify for that $15,000 tax credit. So then you basically are able to fully benefit from that $15,000 tax credit, but yet at the same time not necessarily pay for a house that's $15,000 more expensive. So another way you can take full advantage of this tax credit without having to pay a more expensive home is by being very quick to make an offer. So let's just say, for example, that this tax credit gets passed June 1st. It's not necessarily like on June 2nd everybody's going to rush out to buy a home. They may want to, but they're going to have to gather all their paperwork, find a lender they want to work with, get a pre-approval letter, tour a bunch of homes, and then finally make an offer. That process is at the very least going to take a month, maybe even 2 to 3 months to finally make that offer. So that means if June 1st this tax credit gets passed and June 2nd you're already making an offer on a home, then you benefit from that tax credit without the seller benefiting from the increased demand. And another key person to kind of capitalize on is people that have had their home on the market for several months by the time that this tax credit gets passed. So let's say June 1st comes around and somebody lists their home that day. Most likely they have the time and they're willing to wait till somebody makes them an offer that's 15 grand more than the listing price, or they're just going to increase their listing by 15 grand more than they would previously, versus somebody that has already had their home on the market 3 to 6 months by the time that this tax credit gets passed. They're probably not willing to take that risk at that point. They're probably already desperate to sell their home. And so, maybe somebody might offer $1,000 or $2,000 more than their listing price, but certainly not more than 15 grand. So obviously that would be the best, most ideal situation to use this tax credit. Obviously the reverse being true as well. So if I wait 3 to 6 months to go out there and buy real estate after this tax credit has been passed, most likely that's what everybody else is doing as well. And so that's going to be the peak demand for real estate, which is going to push up those real estate prices as much as possible. What I'd probably recommend, if that does end up happening in a situation, is just to wait it out, right? So if this tax credit ends up being available to everybody for, the next 4 years, then in that situation, I would just wait it out to the very end once real estate prices do start to kind of level off, because that demand is starting to decrease because everybody's already used this advantage of this tax credit. That'd probably be the best situation, kind of like I said in the very beginning. So that's my thoughts on the $15,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers. We'll see if Joe Biden actually gets this plan passed or not. And I'd be very curious on your own thoughts. Comment down below what if you're excited about this plan or perhaps you're not. I know a lot of people that are in the real estate game, let's say realtors, loan officers, people on new construction even, are very excited for this tax credit because that's obviously going to boost sales, boost those commissions. Obviously, there's going to be people that don't necessarily benefit from this. Perhaps you're not necessarily a first-time home buyer, but yet you're going to still kind of have that consequence of higher real estate prices down the road when you go to buy your second home or perhaps move or whatever your situation is. So I'd be very curious, please comment down below. And if you appreciate this video at all, please give it a big thumbs up. I would sincerely appreciate it. And as always, if you like personal finance, videos regarding home buying, car buying type videos, career advice, anything that you like talking about, please hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you in the next one.